that we have set for ourselves. Thank you, Prem Jain, for making this happen again. Thank you for being there. I can see you present at the session. Well, as to you, Sean Foley and Jean Grebet, as well as J.K. Gupta, I can't thank you enough for having said yes. It's taken us a long time. It's taken us almost three and a half weeks for us to get here to the set of thoughts and presentations and views that you will offer. To start with, Sean, let me ask you, you came here nearly 51 years ago in 1969, long hair, lanky young man, coming to the Pushkar Festival, going over to Bombay and then to Bangalore. And then I think you traveled out to Kathmandu and back to Brisbane. Tell us about what you saw of in India at that point in time when we were 1/3 the current population. We were 400 million then. Any thoughts on that, Sean?
India was a much easier place to travel in.
Okay.
It was very friendly, less crowded. For a single traveler like me, the government guest houses were still operating, and clean and friendly and simple. And traveling by train was not too crowded. So it was a pleasure from beginning to finish. And I spent 6 months there and enjoyed the whole time.
All right. You spent a full 6 months in India in 1969. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when you came back next, when was that? When I last met you, possibly 2000, 2002?
No, we came back and indulged ourselves on the Queen of the Desert in 1995.
Ah, all right. Okay. Okay.
And various times since then, I worked in Nepal for a year in 2000, 2001.
Right.
And then we met again in 2014.
Right. You have to speak a little louder. You're not too audible. Yeah. And the last was, of course, in 2014. That's right. Jean, when did you first come to India? I know you had a long love affair with India, but can you tell us something about what drew, as striking about this country? I know you've been in South America, you've been in Africa and in Indonesia. Sean has spent 19, 20 years in Indonesia, as he will tell you. Tell us what India has meant to you, Jean Grebet. Jean, are you there? Okay. I can see him there, yeah. Are you hearing us, John? Okay. While he comes back, maybe, yeah, there he is. There he is. Go on, John. You got to speak. Okay. Let's not wait for him. Let me start this with J.K. Gupta. Would you want to say something as opening notes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes on what you think you would want to, what do you see as expectations of this session that we're going to have before us of an hour? J.K.? Even he is. There you are. Yes, please. Yeah. What do you see? Yes, gone. Yes.
I think it's a great effort, to look at issue which looks, which is, I think, is not discussed very much,
That's right.
We always look at the urban as the driver of economy, employment, and then generating wealth. But rural area remains, I think, a neglected lot.
Fair.
We have not been able to understand the potential rural India holds.
Right.
Because we are having 70% of the population living in rural areas.
I know.
We're going to, have rural areas dominating till 2050, when India will be 50%, and that time will be 1.6 billion. But that's, that doesn't, change the context. But I think majority of problems of these developing nations, I'm not talking of India only, but I can talk globally, If majority of problems globally of the developing countries are there, it is because of their neglect of the rural areas. Unfortunately, we have not been understand the genesis of the rural areas, their role and their, potential and their capacity to make country sustainable. I
Sure.
can only say if we continue to neglect in rural areas, I don't think we can
Okay.
be in a better position. I like
Jean Grebe, I can see you. You're back. Would you want to
Yes,
add something quick chip in over 2 minutes or so of what you expect from this 1 hour that we have got before us?
yes. Well, an amazing point. I was saying the first time I went to India was 2006, and at that time there were only very little airports in the 5 metro cities and no metro line except in Delhi at that time. And I saw the infrastructure and the construction. And I was thinking, I was going to China very often at that time, and I was thinking, they are building India very, very slowly. But finally, they did not. India did not. They built very fast equipment of cities with metro in each metro cities, metro lines. So finally, the pace of development of India is tremendous regarding the multitude of population. So the pace of development is very important, which is a very big threat about the sustainable urbanization path that we shall speak about today, regarding the question of risks, natural risks, and the question as well of demography as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I shall share ideas with you and tell a story based on my observation and experience later on.
Sure. To all of you listeners, I know there are a lot of you who are leaders out there. I will acknowledge you by name, some of you later on. Let me start by saying that the Prem Jain Memorial Trust launched this monthly series of the colloquium to explore issues and concerns of sustainability beyond all the well-meant programs and commercial activities of certification of buildings by various agencies, the CII and the IGBC being one, and industry trusts from other industry associations or industrial associations that we have in India. So we told ourselves that we've got to see how we can forge a few thought leadership strands and speak about them every month with some of these fine discerning minds from across India and from across the world. The first colloquium was toward the end of May 2020. We explored the jobs landscape in India. It wasn't just a webinar, and none of them are just webinars, not even this one today. At the Trust, we are tracking progress since then from May into June and July. We are talking to CII. We had one of the speakers from CII and from another person from CRIDAI. And we're trying to see what these people are likely to be doing into the year ahead on what they spoke about. How much of their intent expressed at that colloquium is going to actually be driven by them into the year has been one of the concerns that at the Trust we are trying to see if we can sort of monitor. The June colloquium brought two committed soldiers, Geeta and Ramani, face to face with two leading urban architects, Sandeep Shekre and Jayesh Haryani. One, the former is from Bombay, the second, Jayesh, is from Ahmedabad. Both of them architects, as I said. And since then, I have been, along with other people, tracking to see whether they are walking the intent they expressed of supporting local technology initiatives in villages and supporting capacity building in, like JK just now said, in the Bharat that is India. We are, well, at least the commitment that was made or the promises that were made at that colloquium was that the Indian Institute of Architects, the IGBC, even the ministry, the chairman of the IGBC said, I will see if I can have a meeting managed or set up with the Minister of Water Resources and such. So we are trying to see how these colloquiums can kick up ideas, thoughts, perspectives, insights that can not only help those same individuals who want to lead such initiatives, but also to see if it can help others who are listeners from various leading institutions who would want to see that they further the thought and take concerns and action forward. This edition of the Prem Jain Colloquium has seen about 22 mails back and forth between these three speakers. And each of us have weighed what should be focused upon and what should not be. An hour, 60 minutes of such a discussion offers so little time for thinkers of the kind these men represent. Between Jean Grebet and Sean Foley, they represent work in nearly every continent, barring the polar caps. And between Jeet and I, we represent about 80, 90 years, collective years of this search to see how India can find some directions toward balancing conservation with commerce. The quest has been the same for all four of us. I've known Sean for what, 20 years now. I've known Jean Grebet for about 10, 12 years now. And every time he comes to India, even if his calendar doesn't show Bangalore, he will somehow make a flight, a domestic flight connect from Delhi to Bangalore or Bombay to Bangalore and spend a day or two with us and go back. The quest has been the same, as I said. Here we have at this colloquium today, I'm hoping, and all of us are hoping here as speakers, to see how we will look at what our children and their future would be like, with certain thoughts, takeaways that we can set down at the end of this session. Let's hope that these thinkers will offer very specific takeaways, is what I would say. Jean, you will remember a chat we had in your hometown in Paris some 10, 11 years ago, when we saw this large group of Chinese tourists walking by. China had been boosting your tourism economy in France, and we spoke of the dread of India becoming an economic superpower, of the damage that it will do to the world if China had devastated their own, if like China, we devastate our own ecology, like Africa is also threatening to do over the next, say, 20 years, as China did in the last 25 years. India has been pushing for mining rights, you know, all of you know, in Africa, in Australia, in Indonesia, right there in Sean Foley's backyard in Brisbane. He knows the battles that Queensland has had on coal mining, and some Indian companies were connected with this. Debashish, a colleague at the Prem Jain Trust, wrote to me 2-3 days ago of his alarm at a recent UN report on the per capita tree population in India being the lowest in the world. Why should any of us be surprised with that? Canada has 9,000 trees per capita. Russia has 4,500. The US has 700. China has about 100 trees per capita per Chinese. And the figure for India is 28 trees to every Indian. You heard that right, 28. All you need to do is Google trees per capita and you land on this data that I will offer you now. Bihar as a state has no more than 1% forest cover after Jharkhand was removed statistically from its geographical whatever. Most states are at 13 to 15%. The official statistic continues to claim 20% national cover, and it's declining. Yet we want to double and triple GDP from the current $3 trillion, or about 20 lakh crores. So what is the future before us? Is this the direction we need to take or want to take? What does India 2040 offer to our children and grandchildren? These are questions we want to see if we can explore here. Jean, if it's okay with you, Jean Grebet,
yeah.
you could possibly share your screen now and take your 10, 12, whatever, maybe 14 minutes, and
okay.
Tell us what you want to offer to the viewers and listeners here today. And then we will get to Sean Foley. In between, we'll see if we can get some views and insights from Jeet Kumar Gupta.
With pleasure. Did you got the presentation?
Yes, it's on.
Okay,
Go
good.
ahead, please.
So I'm very happy to share you some ideas and observation I had worldwide and specifically in India. I would like to begin with two important points. These important points are the question of transition and the question of climate change impact. So demographic transition is a very key issue, and urbanization involves decrease of fertility rate. It means that the fast growing population worldwide will decrease within the next decades, especially for instance, India, Africa. So we have to be cautious that in fact, what is the curve of population growth, which would more decreasing curve. So moreover, there is a kind of population recycling from megacities towards towards tier 2 cities, a kind of rebalance of the population in a nation. This is why worldwide, especially in Africa, the growth rate of second-rank cities is much higher than these of megacities. So you can see that worldwide cities are changing by the extremes. You have the very wealthy pockets increasing, and as well on the bottom of the pyramid as well, you have self-constructed areas growing as well. And in the middle, you have the inertia of the conventional city, which is not responsive. We need 25 years of responsiveness to build new projects. The second point is climate change impact. So Africa, for instance, endures severe impacts. The challenge involves dealing with the development and infrastructure deficit, in addition to required adaptation to and mitigation to climate change. But in fact, it's a worldwide challenge. So the big issue is to deal with scarcity. So how to manage scarce resource in the world, especially in the urban world. So scarce resources, space, money, infrastructure, land. So how to provide security, how to manage risks, which is really a worldwide challenge. And you can see in this sketch the share of available and disposable land worldwide, which is really not so huge, and the share of agriculture, the share of forests. Harry was speaking about the number of trees per capita, and a very alarming point is as well a proficiency domain of Harry, which is water. So you can see that the percentage of fresh water is really tiny to feed the world, and it is really a life resource. So we have to be very cautious of the management of this resource, and it will be my conclusion as well later on. So how to find the way? India has a very specific situation. This is a map we made through research based on the 2011 census and monitoring more than 50 datas, just to have a kind of cartography of the situation of different regions of India. So you can see that rural India is prominent, but other areas are changing very fast in a Western way of doing as well. So what is the stake of urbanization in India? We have a very good example in a project we made with Les Ateliers a few years ago in Chhattisgarh, in Naya Raipur, and a very rural area. And the idea was to find adjustments to be proposed to the plan, especially at the thresholds at all scales between sectors, between urban and rural areas, between urban sectors together. So you can see the very peaceful and very natural environment of the villages in Chhattisgarh and the project of the new capital city. The point is that Naya Raipur is planned to accommodate 5.6 lakh of dwellers adjacent to the existing city of Raipur, the old city of Raipur, and it is scheduled for completion by 2031. The site identified for the new city was already home to some 30,000 villagers in 41 villages. So you can see in the master plan, there are 40 villages, and the rural farmers will mostly continue to live in their homes and are being compensated for the loss of their agricultural land and provided with support for transition into urban life. Well, this is the theory and the schemes for development. But the villages in the fields are an existing network, and especially the question of water is important through the talabs. The network of ponds or talabs is a clear part of the identity of the region and provides an example of the wider polarization between the rural and urban economies in the regions. So the economy of the new city should also be adjusted to better incorporate the traditional economic skills of the surrounding areas, and the villagers who have lost their farmland will not all be able to make the transition to a modern economy. So we can see that the question of transition as well is very important. It would be relevant to integrate the traditional and modern skills into the green economy towards sustainable and resilient solutions. So this is why we suggested to develop education, training, and research centers oriented to agronomy, biotech hubs, and agricultural research. So you can see the master plan. It is a kind of a Chinese city emerging from the Indian soil in the middle of nowhere, but the nowhere is not nowhere. It's a very peaceful rural area. So the question of plugging this urban environment to the natural and rural situation is really a big challenge. So I could, this project of Les Ateliers was in 2012, and I had opportunity to go back 2 years later, and you can see the difference. There are no much difference, no inhabitants, and a few cows in the streets. But this is a urban situation, in case, a urban project for the future in India, showing the challenge of mixing different culture, rural and urban one. One of the most important equipment which has been built first was a cricket stadium. You can see top on the right, and you can see the coexistence of rural way of life and the new equipments as well. Very nice and very aesthetic, peaceful areas. Another important point of India, I would say, for the future is to value up the assets. And India has a lot of assets. Of course, for a foreigner coming for the first time to India, it seems to be a big chaos, especially the cities. So how can we gain from it for the future? When you go in some urban areas, you can see these different pictures, which are not so peaceful as rural areas. But finally, you can observe, analyze, and mostly understand what's going on. Finally, it's not a mess. It's a very organized and very ordered activities which take place in these areas. And we had a research on Dharavi. Dharavi, one of the famous places in India, named as a slum, but not so slummy as well. And we could analyze the typology of building and the width of roads and the infrastructure. We were the first to make a mapping of the road network. And you can see how sophisticated is the typology of the building, of the urban settlement. So you have very precise sizes of width, of lanes, streets, which accommodate a lot of activities. And we could see how far is the hierarchy of the roads and the networks within this part of the city. So, and Dharavi is really an example, and some universities are working to build softwares for planning cities based on the experience of Dharavi, because human intelligence is really at stake and really involved in Dharavi management. The unit base is basic unit is a tool house where people work on the ground floor and live upstairs or have some work upstairs. And you can see the way of moving in Dharavi is really specifically adapted to the activities, to the transportation means, and to the kind of goods to carry. And as well, this typology and hierarchy is very sophisticated. Quite an example of human intelligence as well. So one significant question of Harry was how to build sustainable and resilient urban ecosystems. And one key issue is to find inspiration from, I would say, archaic references. Maybe the adjective was more vernacular references. Worldwide, we have a lot. As I showed you in India, you have a lot. But in India, worldwide, you have some steady ecosystems, which are really references. So I shall not last a long time explaining that. You have Iran as well, a very interesting example of climate engineering, just in cooling engineering of cities through the canals, underground canals, providing water from 100 kilometers on the bottom of mountains from snow melting. And climate change is really a big issue because there is no snow anymore in winter, so no more water. Brazil as well in building in construction expertise, in building in hazardous areas. So you can see how sophisticated is the human intelligence as well, showing under constraint way of doing in a very landslide areas. Indonesia is really interesting as well through the kampungs. This is in Surabaya, the second Indonesian city, developing a lot of environmental services, such as composting, planting orchids, and so on, and using local staff in circular economy. And the way of administrating, the way of managing this district, this area is really interesting as well on a social point of view as well. Uganda, where we could have a project with Harry last year. So there is a high proficiency in circular economy, green and circular economy, in recycling green stuff and solving the question of charcoal providing CO2 emissions in the city. So a way of being more responsible with the environment, with the air quality, and as well using local and disposable stuff for daily life, which is a great learning as well. So what we could learn from this example is how to integrate low-tech and high-tech solutions. I think this is a very important question, especially regarding the fashion of smart cities emerging worldwide everywhere. So smart cities should be high-tech or low-tech, which is really a question. I've not the answer by the moment. I would suggest that it would be a mixing between the two. So you can see what would be the path of the future, implementing low-tech solutions or high-tech solutions. In any case, low-tech innovation is really inspiring for the future. So in India, you have rickshaws, you have becak in Indonesia, different way of moving and solving the key question of last mile connectivity. And you have solutions. In Western Europe, we have not, except bike sharing, but you can see that we can find inspiration in your countries. Another important point regarding India is that the cities and the urban territories seem to be very scattered. But in fact, it can be an opportunity and showing us the right scale for action, which would be bottom-up, grassroots level, and pockets. So you can see that in India, and you know that better than me, that you have a lot of pockets. You have integrated townships, you have SEZ, you have satellite towns, industrial parks, and so on. Some areas which are scattered and disseminated in the urban territory. So, but in fact, it's a good way to develop proper solutions on a local level in the neighborhoods, and then scale up and disseminate them later on. So a good size and good scale to innovate and find solution on the local and grassroots level. Just mixing the different assets of the natural resources all together, the question of fooding, the question of energy all together, and begin to design new eco-district, new areas, as BCIL did previously, and organize a circular economy in a really awareness dissemination within the population, which is able to experiment and to innovate by themselves. So the question is to first deal with sensitive areas to preserve them. Sensitive areas would be mountain valleys, would be islands, to implement these solutions really in emergency to preserve steady ecosystems. So we have an example in Switzerland, some example we could share with some friends recently, in Lacs, in a mountain resort. And so they tried to implement this ecosystem, dealing with energy production, renewable energy, dealing with water preservation, and the question of providing energy within the resort on a natural basis. My conclusion would be that finally the margin of progress and action is really narrow. We are finally trapped into a zero-sum game. When we try to improve one field, which could be mobility, for instance, electric mobility, in fact, we deteriorate some others, and all that together. So in India, there are interesting solutions, something we studied about the question of using electricity and producing electricity. So you have the question, and we compare that to the water management as well. And of course, you have to produce water and electricity. You have to store it, distribute it, find new services, innovative service for the population, and find alternative solutions. All that is really interesting, how to fill the gap, how to assemble the existing bricks. And the key question of human is very important, as the question of informal services, which would be a very important link within the formal chain. But all that is able to provide much more than we can find in the conventional markets. So, and especially with IT development in India, you may use all these assets much more than it's produced. And the conclusion is that a scheme showing the way for the future. So how to combine all these resources, how to preserve them. And as I said, it's really a zero-sum game, because once you improve one field, you deteriorate the other. So how to find the equilibrium, how to compensate, and how to use in a frugal way all the existing assets all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. When you came in 2013 to do the series of workshops at Naya Raipur, what were your expectations? And when you went back there 2.5 years ago, when you last came here, what did you see and where was the mismatch?
Well, I think the situation of Naya Raipur is very, very interesting, because it is moving India forward to the future. Creating a greenfield from scratch, a new city. Obviously, the horizon of time is ambitious, but not so far. It's by 2030. And the big issue they had at the moment when we were there was a problem of scale. They designed a large main avenue, 100 meters wide, which is much more than Champs-Élysées in Paris, which is really not the human scale. You can see that on the schemes I show you, you have the core city, which is a kind of Chinese scale, but India has not the scale of China. So it was really a good opportunity to provide awareness about the right scale to implement. And
Right.
this is coming back to the discussion I had about the bottom-up initiative. Bottom-up on a grassroots level, which is a small scale. So how to deal with neighborhoods, and specifically you don't design or don't build a city within a few years, you need time. So you have to do it very progressively. So the question of scale and the question of pace, implementation pace are linked all together.
Yeah, right. Well, roads wider than the Champs-Élysées, you know. JK, what would you want to offer as your take to what Jean Grebet has offered so far before we turn to Sean Foley?
I think he has done a great analysis and study, which comes from a person who is not connected with India, and that makes a lot of, positivity and neutrality, I would say. But I think what I would like to say is that we are looking at cities or villages in isolation of one another. They cannot be. I myself, as my perception, we look at rural settlement, we look at urban settlement. I call them civilizations. It's a rural civilization, it's an urban civilization. There are no other Roman civilization or any, Indus civilization. Now there exist only two kinds of civilization.
Sure.
Urban civilization and the rural civilization. They remain in contradiction. They remain in conflict. They have different characters. They have different genesis.
Sure.
I like to.
Yeah. John was talking about a transition from the traditional to this present day sort of urban. I don't know if I can call it modern. What would your take be on that?
In fact, it's not possible in India. Let's understand, transition. Let one thing we understand, poverty is not a urban problem.
Right.
We are looking at slums. We looked at Darwi, which had 1 million people living in 2.5 square kilometers. That's never existing in India. That will never exist in India. Let's understand, poverty is not a urban problem. Poverty is a human problem. They are visible only in urban area for the reason they get concentrated in the urban context.
Sure.
So what is the problem? Why Dharma is existing? Despite the fact, there is most inhuman kind of environment exists there. It's simply, that we have neglected the rural areas. Rural areas are not offering that kind of, you can say the amenities, etc. And despite, living a subhuman life, they still live in the slums, That's one point, Why they are in slums, but we should understand. They are here not for living, They are here for making a living. I think we have to differentiate, why there's a difference between why people are living in subhuman, condition, despite, they are better off in their residence for the simple reason they don't have resources at the back place, Secondly, I would say, let's view India in a different context. We are not resource efficient or resource gifted country, We have only 2.4% of the global land and we have 17.3% of the population. Can you believe it? 17.16 of the population and 1/40th of the land. And there, 70% of the population is dependent upon the land as the, in the rural area. How can we think of prosperity?
Okay.
This is what
we'll pause there. We'll pause there and see if we can request Sean Foley to give us some insights. But before he speaks, Sean, maybe while you share your screen, I shall tell them some stories about you. He came to India, as he said, in 1969, spent a good 6 months as a student. He visits Pushkar, and you all know, and this is something I'd like you to reflect upon. We have 12 million, 20 million people at the Mahakumbh in Prayag the last time. How do they come? There are no advertisements. Nobody pays them any money. And they all travel so frugally with rice, cooked rice sometimes, rotis sometimes, packed in soft cloth bags or little bundles. And they don't eat outside. And these people travel on their own, at their own cost, 12 million to 20 million or 30 million people. How do they do that? Isn't there some lesson for sustainability there? 700 million people, as J.K. Gupta says, could be 750 million. Your figure could be, it's just your word against mine. Are people who reside in our villages. India has 6 lakh villages. China has 6 lakh villages. Africa, where Jean has worked for the last, 15 years now, has 4 lakh villages. Between just these 3 regions, we have got 16 lakh or 1.6 million villages. The entire world, global data will offer you, has no more than 20 lakh villages. 1/3, therefore, of that rests in India. Do we want our villages to go the way China's villages have gone in this relentless, Armageddonic surge toward urbanization? Today, India is not 31% or 32% urbanized, or 34%, depending on who is giving you the figure. If I go with the same benchmark that China uses for population and towns, we are nearly 60% urbanized. Let's remember that. Let's not delude ourselves into thinking we are 35% urbanized and that the global urbanization rate is at 50% and that India will reach that figure by 2035. We already passed that 50% figure. So, and then look at this. China has got 2.5 times our landmass. Africa has 10 times our landmass. And here, all the 3 regions have the same population. Shamsuddin in Uganda, Peter in Kampala, if you're listening to this, you have 10 times the land area that India has got. Lee Pen from Hong Kong, good afternoon or good evening to you. You know that you have got about 8.7 million square kilometers. Good morning to you, Laurie. You come, Laurie, Trevor, Deutsch, you are listening to this from Montreal, I know. And you are a region where your per capita tree population is at 9,000 to every Canadian. And here I sit in a country where we've got 28 trees to every Indian. Sean, you know the scale we are all talking about. You know what Jean Grebe was trying to say in his own ways. I'd like to see what I can hear from you. You spoke to us all yesterday or the day before of how this transition from the neoliberalist approach to economic development has to take us elsewhere. Maybe you want to talk about that. Maybe you want to tell us a little more about what you have, what your concerns have been on India and the subcontinent for the last 20 years. Well, to all of you listeners, I must tell you that he's devoted to his wife, Melody Kemp, who has been herself a writer. She writes for the Geographic Society, 1795 established a magazine. She wrote recently, maybe about 2 years ago, on the threat to Karachi and Mumbai and other cities out here in Asia of global warming and the rise of seawater surfaces. She writes on the Elephant Trail from India, from Assam to Laos and Thailand. Between the two of them, they have spent about 12, 14 years now in Laos, I think in Vientiane, on the banks of the Mekong. Right now, they are stranded or grounded in Brisbane. Sean Foley, over to you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Do I have to press a button here? Probably not.
The center one, which says share something or the other, like you did yesterday. You're reasonably savvy on systems. You have to speak a little louder, Sean, so that we all can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody here. Harry, I hope you can hear me clearly enough now.
Yes, you need to refocus the slide. We can see it.
The slide, I'm afraid, will be
we can't see the top of the chart. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Jean Grebe has looked at the detail of what happens in cities. I want to step back a little bit. The challenge that Harry gave to me was what looking ahead for 30 years in India, what might be possible, what might be necessary. And given that challenge, I started thinking on the larger scale rather than the smaller scale. Trying to think 2 generations ahead. So what needs to be done so that your children and grandchildren might have a better chance of a better life? One of the things that is coming is India's population will keep growing. But by the time your grandchildren are alive, in about 2050, as you can see in this graph here, which may be showing on the screen, the population will start to decline. India now at 1.3 billion people will go to about 1.6 billion people, and then by the end of this century, decline to less than 1 billion people. This provides a time marker, if you like, for what has to be done for India to survive. It was Jean Javert talked about it as being a zero-sum game. But in this case, it is a time frame showing what needs to be done within this space. When India's population starts to decline again, the question is, what kind of shape will India be in? And if it can get to 2050 or thereabouts in reasonably good shape, then the opportunities for the future will open up. What has been happening in these years is that India's ecological debt, as you can see here, between what is available biocapacity and what is being used is growing. This is only to 2003. So imagine how wide it has become between then and now. There are three major things that need to be thought about as far as I can see. One, of course, I've mentioned, which is population. The second one is the environment and the ecological debt. And this brings with it, of course, resources. The third thing that really needs to be considered is how is India going to cope with the changes in climate that are coming. Whether we like it or not, whether we are thinking about urban areas or rural areas, the climate in India is going to become much more unfriendly in the next 50 years. And that sets the tone for all of the other things that need to be done. Whether you're rich or whether you're poor, you're going to have to cope with a climate that is even tougher than it is now. Where do the resources come? Where will the resources come from to deal with these three challenges? The size of the population, environmental degradation, and changing climate. These are all problems that are on a national scale. They can't be dealt with simply in one corner of India, in the cities or in the rural areas. They need to be dealt with overall.
Sean, sorry to step in. You need to speak either louder or closer to the mic.
I can speak a little bit louder, but
that's right. That's right. That's yeah. You're sounding better now. Yes.
Good. Thank you, Harry. My wife Melody reminds me my voice has become softer and huskier. Aging, I guess. There is a problem here. While India has developed, and all of the things that you can see in India now are far away from the India that I first came to, what has also happened is the inequality in India has grown wider and wider. And a smaller proportion of the population are getting a larger proportion of the resources, and at the same time producing a larger amount of the impact on the environment. This has come, as Harry mentioned, with neoliberalism. And this is an economic system that is really quite cruel. It's cruel to the environment, and it's cruel to people. If this doesn't change, it's very difficult to see how India or any other country can start to move into an area where things are good for everybody, or things are better for everybody. This has been an idea that's been put about. Neoliberalism started only about 40 years ago. It's a new form of capitalism, and it's a particularly dangerous form of capitalism.
Sorry, Sean. Sean. The feedback is that you're not too audible, or maybe you need to, sort of not soften your R's. Don't trill them to the extent possible. Yeah, somehow we're not getting the drift of your sentences somewhere. Maybe you should speak a little slower.
Okay.
I'm getting feed from many listeners. Yeah.
I apologize.
Sorry.
There's very little I can do.
I know. You could possibly speak a little louder. That's all I can suggest.
Yes, the mic is fixed on the headset, so I don't have a separate microphone.
Right. Go on.
Yeah, okay. The question is, with these three large problems, these three mega problems, how are they to be dealt with? The scale of the problem, the resources required, are much greater than available except to the national and the state government. But in the current situation, the national and the state governments do not have these resources because, as a consequence of neoliberalism, their financial resources have been hollowed out. If you look at the reports on India's taxation system, you will see that it collects a small fraction of what comparable countries do. Consequently, the government does not have the resources needed to, for instance, speed up population declines, nor does it have the resources available, as Harry has been noting, to plant or support the planting of millions and millions of more trees. And when it comes to climate change, the government simply doesn't know where to start. The problem is so large. So not only is the economic system causing inequality, the economic system as it is now is removing resources that are needed to cope with getting to 2050. 2050 is probably the point where India could emerge through the bottleneck, the zero-sum game that Jean Guerre mentioned before. To do this, it requires a lifelong commitment from the people that are probably listening to this presentation, because they are the people who will be around for the next 30 years and available to take on this task. I don't feel qualified to suggest the details of what needs to be done, but it's obvious that the generation of younger Indians are the people that will need to do this work so that their children can live a good life, and so their children's children can live a good life. I don't think it is up to foreigners to do more than support what India wants to do. But it's clear that these are major problems that India will have to tackle. And to do that, both the individuals and the government will need the resources available. And to do this, they will need a much more humane economic system. So India, from having a relatively humane economic system, has now got one that is very inhumane. The scale of the task, if you like, to call a historical parallel, is roughly the same as Gandhiji had to gain India's independence. It will be long and it will be hard, but the result will be worthwhile. I'd like to listen to questions from other people, Harry, so please switch me back there.
That's right. Sean, when you extrapolate and say that India by 2100 would have 1 billion people, a drop of 500 million, are you suggesting that, like Malthus said in 1798 or 99, 200 years plus ago, that India will see that kind of a curve happening? Is that something that's real in your mind? And how do you think that'll happen?
It happens, the main ways in which it appears to be happening is because families are having less children. And the reason that that is happening is women's education and the better availability of contraception. And these are things that are already slowing the birth rate in India. And it's very important that these efforts are funded so they can be speeded up.
Interestingly, as you know, if in the Indian context, 100 years after Malthus said what he did, between 1880 or 1890, when the Bengal famine came in the 1890s, let us say 94, 95, 97, and about 1920, India lost about 25 million people. Now, at that point in time, India's population was about 220. 10% of its population culled in much of ways Malthus had sort of forecast, shall we say. And if I go by what you're saying, we should see by the end of this century, we didn't see it at the end of the last century, of course, we should see that kind of a dramatic shift in population demographics. Are you suggesting that?
I'm suggesting that human populations, as animal populations, go through broad cycles. And in this case, it's not that there is a famine It causes a great deal of suffering and death, but it's a slower process over 50, 30 years in this case, to 100 years, to the end of the century. The famine in Bengal, affected. This is a much slower process, and hopefully it's a natural decrease, not a catastrophe.
Right. And what is your take on what Jean Grepé said and then J.K. Gupta did on this, shall we say, unbridgeable divide between the Bharat that is India and the urban India that is India? Do you see a twain meeting there?
It's interesting. Maybe I see India in a different way, but I've always seen the rural areas and the urban areas interpenetrating, moving back and forth, and millions of people moving in and out of the cities, depending on the season, depending on where work is available. If you look at a map of India, even though there are millions of people in the cities actually occupy quite a small amount of the land, only a few percent of the total area. So India geographically is very rural.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. JK, he seems to agree with you. Both of you have taken 2050 as a benchmark. He seems to also see a major inflection by 2050. Do you want to respond to what Sean said, JK?
I think the 2050 looks to be very obvious, We have been adding 20 million people every year. That's what the trend has been, and we're going to continue those 20 million to be added in the present census, which is going to be conducted in the year next year, when it's going to be conducted. I think we are going to touch 1.4 billion surely, That is the scale. And we are saying that we'll be 1.6 billion by the 2050. I think we'll be achieving this target by 2040 itself, 2041 itself, I can say, But the fact, like Hari, you said, that nature has its own system of making corrections, and these pandemics are all the outcome of those human activities, and nature is trying to balance out, But I think we in India, as I have said, we are in a very, difficult situation. So there's land-man ratio is there, and we are going to be, in further problem. The problem remains, it's not housing, it's not, making cities. It's primarily feeding the people, who are going to be there, which remains the critical factor. And the food has to come from the, land itself. And that's where the land becomes very, very important. What I say is, the way we are going through, I think we have to change the paradigm, Now from urban-led development, I think we have to shift to the regional-led development, But in the regional-led development, you are not looking at cities, you are looking at both urban and rural areas. In India, the survival is only if you look rural area as a partner of the urban area and not they are in conflict with another, I can only say majority of urban problem have their genesis in the neglect of the rural area. And if we continue with our urban-led planning, and neglect the rural area, you will find many dharvis, emerging in Delhi or, in Calcutta and other areas. So that's what first take would be, that we have to graduate from the urban planning to the regional planning. That's number one. Number two, I would say the biggest resource in India remains the human beings, because their number are going to be, their number are already large. We are going to take over China by 2036, So human resource is the most, vital and evident resource. Only thing our, growth and development agenda should be skilling this manpower, and upgrading the quality on manpower. If we continue to neglect the, the skilling of these people, I think this is going to be a major issue, When you look at the rural areas, I think if you have seen the rural area, biggest problem in rural decline and poverty is the total divide of the community. In rural areas, there are so many, castes and people are totally divided. And that is the, basic reason why the villages are being pulled together. Unless and until villagers work together, they work on a cooperative basis, they work on collaborative basis, they pool their resources. I don't think, India has any chance of growing in a very faster pace. So there we have to look for, how we scale India, how we scale the villager, and how we use the technology. I see, in the pandemic, technology is appearing to be greatest leveler, and it can play a great role in empowering the rural communities, provided they cooperate, they collaborate, and they pool their resources to march ahead.
Great. Jean, I have another, reflection for you. It's not a question. You know that across those 54 countries in Africa, almost every nation is showing 3.5%, sometimes 4.5% as GDP growth, year upon year. India has shown, and this wonderful debate we have had for 20 years, battling with China on how that they were at 8% and we were at 3% to 5 to 7% and all that sort of thing. What we forget in all of this is that here is a unique landmass as the subcontinent goes, which has got, as Suresh is pointing out just now in a chat box, which has got 7,900 towns and cities, and which has got this 6 lakh. It's not 6,40,000. We lost 40,000 villages to no more than about 70 coal blocks in just this decade between 2012 and 2020. 40,000 villages were lost. Now, Jean, to you, this relentless obsession with 3 to 4% to 5% GDP, is that the way to go for India and for Africa? Or do you see a way around this in a way, like JK just now said, that we look at urban and, regional planning, from urban to regional planning? You said something about a transition to traditional economic activity. Do you see some large picture emerging here that we can put together in some coherent ways and cohesive ways? Jean.
Yeah, I would say finally worldwide, decrease should be the target, much more than increase. We want every year to do more, to have more numerous, more important result production and so on. So we are exhausting the world, the natural world, and any asset we have. So really the question of beyond transition, the problem is to change the mindset. And rural environment should change as well. So soils are exhausted, spoiled.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So a new way of doing agriculture is really worldwide and obviously in India issue and challenge. And the second point as well is to change the cities. We saw the relevant challenge in Africa of urban farming, and they develop solution. They have crops in very small yards within the cities, and showing the way to develop local loops and very short loops, circular economy, which is really a very interesting point. And especially Jit Kumar spoke about collaboration, pool of resources, just neighborhoods to do things all together, not on a fashionable way as we do in Europe, where urban farming is really fashionable, but really inefficient. That's the kind of show off, as if we wanted to show that we understood the environmental issue, which is not the case.
Right.
But doing very efficient urban farming could be a very interesting way to change the cities as well.
Yeah.
Mitigate heat areas, climate change as well, absorb rainfalls, and especially the question of not permeable surfaces in cities is a big issue.
Yeah, that's right.
Especially in monsoon areas as India. So
sure.
All that is a way to design and to reshape a very efficient ecosystem where each component has a strong impact altogether in interrelation with the other one.
To you, Sean Foley, you heard Jean Grebet just now say, soil is the only asset of the nation. And if you go back to, people who have been historians working on the Indus Valley civilizations, remnants of records and such, you know that in less than 60 or 70 years, the entire civilization, which was 2,000 years old, perished completely, without any sign of it. You worked for nearly 10, 12 years with Sandhana, 5 years as its chairman, working on agriculture and reforestation. I won't say afforestation. What is your take on soil? As this country has this remarkable, magnificent obsession with building the next 300 billion square feet. You heard me right. It's nothing to do with millions in India. We have got today as building stock 160 billion square feet. We are adding, well, at least projected figures suggest that we are adding another 250 to 300 billion square feet. Is this what India needs, with no more than 2.5% of the landmass being covered by cities? Or do we need to look at this really scary sentence that Jean Grebet gave us just now of how soil remains the only asset of a country? Sean Foley. Have we lost you?
Thank you, Harry.
Sean? Yeah.
Certainly the soils remain the great assets of India. Have you lost me or not?
No, we can hear you now, yes.
I've lost you now.
Yeah.
Okay. I think soils do remain the main asset. And as Kumar Gupta has pointed out, most of India is rural, and so the soils are absolutely vital for them. Overall, the point that I was making is that we need to look forward to seeing how we can reduce the load on the earth and give the earth time to regenerate, but also reduce our impact on all kinds of natural resources. We can't do it quickly.
Yes.
It's a generational task. And this is why when you said, okay, look 30 years ahead, this is what we're doing. And one of the chat comments that came up was, this is too far ahead. We will all be gone by then. But we need to be thinking of our children and our grandchildren, not just of this generation. Our generation, you and I, Harry, at our age, carry a fair bit of the responsibility for the state of the world currently. We need to find a way to pass on to the next generation whatever support we can, so that they can do a better job, and they can do a better job for their children.
Sure. And
Jean Grebet hinted at it in the sense that basically say we need to decrease, not increase all the time. It will be a challenge, and it won't happen overnight. It's a generational task. Gandhiji, unfortunately, did not long to see India's independence, but he knew he was working on something that was a generational challenge.
Right.
We have the same problem.
Right. Tell us a little more with an example, perhaps, of the model of deceleration that India could be considering into the next 3 decades. I got you there.
That's a very large challenge. I don't think I am capable of specifying that.
Fair.
It's very much
enough.
something that is required.
Yeah.
But it's something. I mean, it's part of the challenge. Part of the challenge that I have offered a response.
Yeah. Okay. I will give you an example.
System, the improvement of the taxation system.
Okay.
And the government.
Go on. Go on. Yeah. Expand on that.
The point I was making was there needs to be a change in.
No, I didn't get you. The last sentence was lost on me.
You better continue. What I'm saying is that, okay. Governments need the resources to deal with these mega problems that I mentioned earlier. It cannot be dealt with by individuals or even small groups.
That's right.
Change is changing away in the economic system.
I got that, but then look at it another way. I'm sure JK will have his views on it. We have another, say, 3-4 minutes to exchange a few views, and then we transit to the takeaways of this discussion, of this wonderful discussion of today. The brutality of public expenditure has been the disaster, the tragedy of this country for the last, say, at least 30 years. Now look at the dance. What has been foisted for way too long on we the people, on the pretext of the greater good of the larger lot at the cost of a smaller number. Take our dams, take our coal mining, for instance, in your own backyard, in Indonesia to the north, and here, of course, in central India. And of course, large-scale decimation of complex biodiversity ecosystems that has brought us to this severe state of crisis. You talked about the ecological death. Now, do you believe, does any one of you, all the three of you, this question is for, do you believe that this ecological debt is ever payable at all? I know I'm being rhetorical on that one. So what have we got in return, Sean, after 50 years from 1970 of this utilitarian, shall we say, sense of happiness or desire fulfilled for people in the city by giving them more power, more water and such, with long distance supply modes that India has adopted? What has it given us? And what do you think we should transit into from here if this neoliberalism has not worked for us? Sean. You have seen, you have heard reports, you read more of...
I don't think neoliberalism has worked for anyone.
Okay, all right. Yeah, you would want to take a pass on that. All right, JK, would you want to...
I don't think neoliberalism...
Yeah. Go on, Sean.
Oh, I'm trying not to interrupt other people.
All right. Okay.
Pardon me.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's been very pernicious. I think if we are not going to change it, then we will have a radical decline.
I got it.
This is a dead end street, and it needs to be changed.
JK Gupta, would you want to respond here at this point of inflection?
Thank you, Hari. I think we should accept it, Inequality is the law of nature, There can't be equality. But, the way we have used our mechanism, the urbanization, globalization, and liberalization of economy, they have done more injustice than good to the society. They have promoted disparity. They have promoted inequality among nations, within communities, I think we must accept it. Urbanization is a promoter of inequality. More we run after the urbanization, we're creating a dichotomy. We are, creating contradiction within our society and culture. That's what I would like to say. Right. Secondly, I would like to say is that Gandhiji clearly said there is enough for human needs by nature, but unfortunately, there is less for human greed, It's a greed which is driving the cities, and the greed which is promoting the human activities. Unfortunately, in India, when we look at why we are landing into problem, it is, I already said the land, the land, we are deficient in land and we need more land. But unfortunately, I am repeating Gandhiji here. He says the day the land is being treated as a commodity, and the farmers started trading the land, India is going to surely head for a crisis. Now land is being speculated, and it is clearly said, if you want to be rich in this world, stop doing anything, start buying the land because nobody is manufacturing the land. So land is one which is being speculated, which is being traded as a commodity, and which is now becoming a scarce commodity. I can only say, if this country where we are placed in such a difficult situation with land-man ratio and land being the basic, necessity for meeting all human needs, India has to think about nationalizing land, and it is not to be a commodity which is available for free trading.
I
And
got that.
John was saying, looking at, the Amravati, they are planning a city for 5.5 lakh. They have acquired thousands of acres, and that city will not have for next 40 years the land, Look at the new capital which is coming up in, this, in the Andhra, near that Amravati city I was talking about. They are planning for a city for a 55 million people, and they have acquired around 50 to 60,000 acres of land. And that land is never going to be used for next 50 years. And that land is going out of, it was the most fertile land. And that was the most inhuman activity one could never think of.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're right, you're right. We'll leave it there. As Nehru says, JK, in The Discovery of India, if you read the first, the first 20 pages, India has over many centuries survived several such onslaughts, including the one that is now being perpetrated, shall we say, in the last 20 years. We could have been speaking French like Jean and not English today if Clive had not succeeded, 300, 400, 500 years ago. Now, this colonizing influence, economically speaking, that we have in Francophone Africa or here in India or elsewhere in these third world parts of the world, is something that we need to shed. That when you talk Gandhi, you're talking about how we can decolonize. India has some very excellent things going for us, both for you and Sean and John. For the first time in the last 5 or 6 years, India is energy self-sufficient in many ways. We don't have this kind of dreadful outages and power cuts that we used to have in those years in 1969, 70, 71, Sean, or even in the early 2000s when Jean Grebe came here to India first. Food, we are at 300 million tons and we are fine. We are self-sufficient again. Health, in terms, we are the fastest growing gray nation in the world. We are at once the youngest nation in the world in terms of our demographics. What that means, and I haven't still understood completely, I will possibly internalize what Sean explained to us on how, from 1.5 billion by 2100, we would get to that figure of about 1 billion, which will make it a lot more sustainable. Jean has seen this from Ghana to Morocco to Algeria, Senegal, Ivory Coast. Jean, the challenges that they all have of an explosive doubling of their population in the next 10 years. We don't want that here in India. I think the lessons are clear for an Africa from what India has done in the last 20 years, and for India from what China has done in the last 30 years. So if we are not going to learn and be repeated to condemning history or condemning ourselves to repeating history, I think we'll not go anywhere at all. So Jean, I'll start with you. Jean Grebe, I'll start with you. What are your 3, 4, 5 takeaways for this colloquium in a way that we can act upon it at the end of it? I will remind you that there are some eminent and influential leaders from industry who are listening to us all.
Yeah, thank you, Ari. Maybe a very important point, and you were speaking about my experience in Africa and working with African colleagues. They first were speaking about awareness. Awareness is conscious, be conscious of. Be conscious of that urban dwellers are disconnected and do not feel sensitive to nature anymore. We are living farther and farther from nature, which is really a very important threat. So there is a bad mechanism ongoing. We need to compensate by consuming more and more. because we are so far from nature. So I would say when you live among the nature, you have fullness, you have a feeling of fullness. You don't need anything more. So I think the priority is to reconnect urban mindset to nature. A very amazing point, Harry, when we prepared this meeting, and even today, I could hear birds singing behind you, which is a part of nature, providing harmony. So this is the first point, is to reconnect with nature in cities, which is very important, and reshape cities with this reconnected point. The other point, as tried to emphasize today, was to be conscious of the assets and to value at them, and find solutions on a frugal way, finding inspiration of reference models. You spoke about energy, so the more you give, the more you want, which is really a very negative spiral. So how to do more with less, which is really the big challenge, and India has a know-how for that. And the other point I emphasize today is the right scale for action, how to join top-down master plans and bottom-up initiatives all together to reach one point of equilibrium.
Right. Sure. How do we do more with less? India has the know-how for it. You're right, Jean. In fact, Dr. Prem Jain used to say, if we can learn from our villages austerity and simple respect for nature, the rest of this 10, 15% of us who are destroying this country's natural resources would have made the country more sufferable, probably livable. Any other takeaway from you, Jean, before I move to Sean Foley?
No, these are the major ones. Just remind 3 points, that's enough.
Great, okay. Sean Foley, 3, 4 takeaways. What do you believe India should be looking at? Indeed, the world. Yes, Sean. Yeah.
I certainly endorse the points that John has made.
Yeah.
I think all things that are very important, the things that we all instinctively enjoy, being connected with nature, and when we have time to reflect, realizing that making modest demands on the planet is by far the best way to go. That's the personal level. I think there also needs to be a broader level. And my point was, there are big changes needed in the economic system, not only so that it is less unequal, more equitable, but also so that the resources can be made available for tackling the things that we talked about before, the size of the population, the degradation of the environment, and the demands that are going to be put on the whole society by climate change. These are things that have to be tackled at the broader level to make it possible for us to enjoy those things at the smaller level and be integrated better with nature. Those are the main points I would emphasize.
Right. You said memorably sometime earlier that, that this conversation was sort of supposed to capture what may be possible for India and what may be necessary for India. What do you think is necessary for India and what is possible for us? If I were to look back at the 3 takeaways that you've just now offered.
The necessity is balancing rather than growing, and making resources available for achieving that balancing. What is possible for India is going to be defined by what the coming generations do. We will not be here. They will need to think at both the large scale and at the small scale.
Absolutely. J.K. Gupta, we have another 3-4 minutes to go. Your takeaways, 3-4, before I wind that up with a few of mine.
I think I will repeat, first takeaway would be, number 1, valuing the land and the
Got it.
environment.
I got that.
Number one. Number
Yes.
two, I would say graduating from urban planning to regional planning, which you take care of urban and rural both,
Got
Third,
it.
I would say skilling the people, that the, resource, human resource, And
Right.
fourth, making villages work on a basis where they adopt a strategy of cooperation, sharing, etc. And last is leveraging technology in
Got
order
it.
to promote this development.
Perfect. Perfect. My summation, ladies and gentlemen, all of you, thank you once again for being with us for all these fascinating 90 minutes. My summation is this. We are clearly witnessing the death of both the theory and the practice of neoliberal capitalism, as Sean Foley has also sort of said pretty strongly. It has lasted 50 years. It held us lots of promise on how it can resolve social, economic, political challenges. It has not, and I'll leave it at that. We saw 30 million people on the roads, on the highways of India. There can be no better testimony of the immense failure of the kind of economic model that we have pursued for all these decades now. The second is this: India, like other countries, has to stop monetizing its natural capital. Nature has got to be just left alone. Sean said that just now, and that is not something that is just desirable. This has got to be made possible. This is necessary for us, as he says. Now, these priceless assets like water, rivers, forests, and hills simply can't be monetized the way we are doing just now. And we've got to see how we stop extracting resources and find other ways of running our economy, which means deceleration. Sean said that again. And my third takeaway is, well, there's a book that one of them sent. I think it was Sean Foley who sent me this book some 2 years ago by a lady called Mariana Mazzucato, Mazzucato. You can find this book if you were to Google the value of everything. You might even get a book that you can, a PDF book version of it that you can download. She talks about who really creates wealth in our world. How do we decide the value of what they do, the people who create such wealth? At the heart of today's financial crisis, or even the economic crisis, is a problem hiding in plain sight. It's value extraction. There is only this business of making money, but not creating value. We identify or misidentify takers of such, wealth of the earth as the makers, and have lost sight of what value really means for us all. That is my third takeaway. The last one is this, and I think I'm echoing what JK said in his own ways. Jean Grebet said it too. Who is destroying it? Ask these questions. Who is creating these things? Who is extracting these things? Who is destroying it? Does it make sense to subsidize large corporations when they go bankrupt? That is, like Shaw was saying, is there money enough for governments to be spending on what is genuinely development? Answers to these questions are key if we want to replace the current system, which only serves as a parasite to all of these things. Can we learn, like Dr. Jain used to say, to learn to respect those millions of them, 700, 800 of them who live in such austerity? This whole delusion, the big lie of per capita being as low in India is not respected for what it is and is derided. Why should it be so? If you look at only this 10%, 15% of the urban Indian, you will see that his per capita is as good as the best in Europe, shall we say, or at least in the United States or in Australia. Why would we want to take a per capita which blends both the rural and the urban, as JK is also saying? I'll stop there. It has been an immensely, useful and insightful learning, hour for me. I hope that Sean and JK and Jean Grebet also liked it as much as I did, and all of you viewers, thank you for staying with us. You're a small number, but an extremely discerning set of minds is what I would say. The colloquium will continue as we go into the future with subjects that are difficult to manage. This one is hard to cage This is not a beast that is easily captured, as you know, when we talk about India inspiring paths to sustainability. I can't thank you, Jean Grebe, enough for spending as many hours as you did putting together multiple things before you gave us that final presentation today. I know each of you have got several hours of lectures to offer us and insights to offer us on this subject, but well, all good things have to come to an end. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, all of you listeners, for being with us. We'll sign off now. Sean Foley from Brisbane, Jean Grebe from south of Paris somewhere. He's not in Paris just now. JK from Chandigarh, and listeners from Canada, from Africa, from Australia, and from Hong Kong or China. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great learning here.
Thank you. Thank you.